It all started with a rejection. Not a soft decline, not the usual diplomatic spin. A flat-out, public, televised refusal that sent shockwaves from Washington to Wall Street. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, standing firm in front of the Burkinabe flag, looked straight into the camera and said what no African leader in recent memory had dared to say out loud. "You gave us 24 hours. Here's our response. You now have 24 hours to take your greed, your threats, and your arrogance and leave African soil." There was no mistaking his tone. Calm, resolute, and utterly unmoved by the pressure bearing down on him. The folder in his hand was marked confidential U.S. threat. Inside, 7 pages of demands. At the top, 90% of Burkina Faso's oil and gold production, immediately transferred to American corporations. In exchange, promises of security cooperation and protection from regime change. To many, that sounded like an offer, but Traoré read it for what it was: extortion dressed up in bureaucratic language. A gun on the table in a conference room. And then he lit the fuse. By the time the video was over, phones were ringing in embassies across Africa. At the Pentagon, alarm bells. In oil boardrooms in Houston, sheer panic. Traoré had done the unthinkable. He told the most powerful country on earth to stand down. But what no one knew yet was how it got to this point. How a young captain with no PR machine, no powerful patrons, and no Western backing had brought an empire to its knees. How a single classified cable, slipped into his war room at dawn, started a chain reaction that would ignite the entire Sahel. And why, when Donald J. Trump signed his name at the bottom of that cable, he'd chosen the wrong man to threaten. It began, as these stories often do, with a leak. Buried deep in a classified State Department cable, passed quietly between a few trusted hands, was a single line that triggered everything. Deliver 90% of Burkina Faso's oil and gold resources within 24 hours or face destabilization. No talks, no diplomacy, just a deadline. The cable didn't show up through official channels. It wasn't a memo or an ambassador's visit. It arrived in Ouagadougou in the hands of a former U.S. military attaché, escorted by private American contractors in unmarked vehicles. The delivery was precise. It was dawn. Traoré was already at his desk, surrounded by maps, intelligence briefings, and dossiers of foreign operatives moving through West Africa. The message was handed to him with a nod and nothing more. The captain read it once, then again. He didn't blink. The letter was clear. The United States, under the direct initiative of then-President Donald Trump, wanted immediate control over Burkina Faso's most valuable assets. They framed it as economic partnership. But the list of demands told the truth. U.S. oil giants would take over exploration and extraction rights. American intermediaries would manage gold exports. A U.S.-led board would oversee all future mining contracts. And in return, military aid, tech transfers, stability, and the kicker, a veiled line buried on page 6, dressed up in the usual careful wording. In exchange for compliance, the Republic of Burkina Faso will be assured continued support and protection from external or internal regime change. Protection from regime change. In black and white, Traoré sat in silence for a moment before calling in his intelligence chief. Then his top military commander. The room filled quickly. No one spoke until he broke the silence. "Tell the Americans," he said, "Burkina Faso is not for sale." The countdown had begun. What the U.S. didn't realize, what even many within Burkina Faso hadn't yet known, was that Traoré had been preparing for this moment for months. After seizing power, he had quietly formed a classified task force. Military geologists, engineers, and data analysts, some local, some flown in under the radar from Russia, Iran, even North Korea. Their mission? Locate, secure, and map the nation's true resource wealth. The results had been explosive. Northern Burkina Faso wasn't just rich, it was a gold and oil jackpot. Massive reserves buried beneath centuries of dust and neglect. The French had known vaguely, the Americans more so, but no one expected the Burkinabe military to have the capacity to confirm it. And no one expected Traoré to do it in secret. The Americans found out the usual way, Satellites. First, strange drilling activity. Then movement of unfamiliar equipment. Drones flying tight patterns over Sahel territory. Whispers between Iranian logistics teams and Venezuelan engineers. Encrypted comms lit up on intercepted networks. The red flags were waving. Something big was happening in the ground, and it wasn't going through Washington. Worse, the gold mines were already shifting hands. Traoré's military had begun pushing out French-controlled firms, replacing them with national security units. Revenues were rerouted. The money was no longer leaving for Paris or Geneva. It was being channeled into a new local fund, entirely state-controlled. That's when the fear set in. This wasn't just about one nation's independence. This was a blueprint, a model for Niger, Chad, Mali, even Congo. A new idea was emerging. An Africa that said no. An Africa that acted alone. That was what Washington feared most. So they sent the message. And they sent Trump. Unlike the politicians in the State Department, Trump didn't bother with subtlety. The document that arrived in Ouagadougou was titled Confidential Strategic Resource Acquisition Framework. But it might as well have said, "Surrender everything." And it came with a note, written in red ink across the top page. Traoré has 24 hours. Now the war was no longer hidden, no longer silent. And Traoré? He wasn't writing his answer on paper. He was writing it in steel. By midday, the cable had been decoded and deconstructed by Traoré's closest advisors. They analyzed the language, traced the delivery channels, confirmed the American contractor's presence in Ouagadougou. None of it surprised them. What did surprise them was how naked the threat was. There was no diplomacy, no illusion of partnership. It was empire speak, updated with corporate gloss. It wasn't even meant to persuade. It was meant to intimidate. But Traoré didn't intimidate easily. At 3 p.m., he activated a command protocol known only to a handful of his inner circle. Operation Faso Souverain. Orders were sent through closed channels. Every major oil site in the country was to go dark, total lockdown. Security doubled. Communications severed. Foreign contractors, some unaware of the bigger play, were escorted off the premises. Gold transport convoys were rerouted, secured, and armed. The country's digital infrastructure was scrubbed. Satellite uplinks used by international partners were quietly disabled. Every major foreign contact operating in Burkina Faso's energy and mining sectors received the same message. Operations temporarily suspended by sovereign directive. Await further instruction. The message wasn't just for the Americans. It was for everyone watching from Paris, London, and Ottawa. Something fundamental had shifted. Burkina Faso was not asking permission anymore. But inside the presidential compound, the captain knew what came next would be harder. He would need to speak. Not behind closed doors, not in leaked memos, but publicly. Directly to his people and the world. By morning, the statement was ready. The national broadcast signal was cleared. No PR handlers, no pre-screened reporters. Just Traoré in uniform, standing beside the Burkinabe flag. One hand resting on the folder stamped, confidential U.S. threat. The broadcast cut to black. Then the feed flickered on. To the people of Burkina Faso, and to our African brothers and sisters. His voice was measured, slow, and clear. The entire country was watching. An offer has been made. To sell our oil. To sell our gold. To sell our honor in exchange for fear. He paused. To those behind this insult. To Mr. Trump and his backers. You have misjudged us. We are not Libya. We are not Iraq. We are not your playground. We will never trade our land for your luxury. We will never bow to your bullets or your banks. Then came the line that would replay in the hearts of a continent. You gave us 24 hours. Here's our response. You now have 24 hours to take your greed, your threats, and your arrogance, and leave African soil. He saluted, turned, and walked off screen. No follow-ups, no media spin, just a statement of fact. Outside, the country erupted. Crowds poured into the streets. People beat drums and waved flags. In Ouagadougou's public squares, Loudspeakers replayed the speech again and again. Students wrote the lines in chalk on campus walls. Miners posted videos holding up gold dust, saying, "We protect what's ours." The momentum was no longer just military. It was cultural, grassroots, real. And that's what scared Washington most. Inside ExxonMobil's war room, a dozen executives pored over live intel. Reports showed oil fields locked down, exports halted. Their projections were falling apart. Chevron sent envoys to the State Department. "Get this back on track," they demanded. But back on track meant back under control, and that door had just slammed shut. At Langley, CIA teams activated contingencies. West Africa lit up on their threat maps. Intelligence units were greenlit for field movement. Surveillance drones flew tighter. Disinformation campaigns went live. On Twitter, accounts with fake African names began calling Traoré reckless. On CNN, panels of experts framed him as unstable, dangerous, erratic. But back home, the effect was the opposite. The more they attacked him, the more people rallied. If CNN hates him, he must be doing something right. Read one viral meme from a Burkinabe student group. Youths wore t-shirts with his face stamped over oil barrels. In cities from Dar es Salaam to Dakar, murals appeared overnight showing him standing tall with a rifle slung low, flanked by the Burkinabe flag. Traoré, a man who had once been a relatively unknown military captain, was now a continent-wide symbol. But symbols are threats, and threats draw fire. Traoré's intelligence briefings confirmed it. Increased U.S. drone presence over Sahel territory. Suspicious movement near the Ghana border. Private security units, possibly linked to foreign intel firms, had been spotted near critical infrastructure. It was clear. If they couldn't buy him out, they'd try to break him. But Traoré wasn't alone. 3 days after his televised rejection, 3 military planes touched down in Ouagadougou. There were no press crews, no red carpets, just soldiers. From Mali came Colonel Assimi Goïta, silent, precise, eyes hard from years of war. From Niger, General Abdourahmane Tiani, steady, calculating. And from Guinea, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, head high, unapologetic. No entourages, no diplomats, just brothers. When they emerged from the presidential palace hours later, they stood beside Traoré. No flags, no speeches, just presence. "If you touch Burkina Faso, you touch all of us," Goïta said, his voice like iron. It was a doctrine, not a slogan. The AES Shield, a regional alliance born not in treaties, but in shared betrayal. Immediately, action followed. Mali deployed veteran advisors to defend oil fields. Niger sent logistics teams to map desert routes for supply chains. Guinea offered full access to its airspace for emergency transport. And behind the scenes, they launched a digital counteroffensive. AES-backed media outlets pumped out stories exposing Western agendas. Videos of the U.S. ultimatum leaked and spread like wildfire. One clip of Traoré standing firm against Trump's threat reached 10 million views in 24 hours. In the Sahel, a new wave of confidence surged. In Bamako, crowds filled the streets shouting, "AES or death." In Conakry, murals showed the 4 leaders standing in solidarity. Even in the Central African Republic, youth groups chanted, "Africa is not for sale." But in Washington, things were falling apart. Former intelligence officers appeared on television, calling Traoré dangerous. Oil stocks dipped. Panic spread through lobbying circles. Trump, under pressure from corporate backers and military voices alike, lashed out on social media. And then came the tweet that made the headlines. Traoré just made the biggest mistake of his life. Africa will pay for this. But in Ouagadougou, Traoré didn't flinch. When his aide showed him the tweet, he reportedly leaned back in his chair, smiled faintly, and said, "That's the sound of an empire losing control." The sun hadn't yet risen over Ouagadougou when Burkina Faso's National Assembly gathered behind closed doors. No press, no leaks, no foreign observers. Just lawmakers, military representatives, and trusted legal advisors operating under Captain Traoré's direct orders. They knew the stakes. This was not just about national policy. This was about drawing a permanent line in the sand. After hours of deliberation, the motion passed, unanimously. All oil and gold reserves within Burkina Faso were hereby nationalized and permanently protected from foreign corporate ownership. No exceptions. No loopholes. The ink dried before dawn. By sunrise, messages went out to every foreign firm still operating within the country. Licenses revoked. Access suspended. Contracts annulled. U.S.-backed energy teams were escorted to the border under armed watch. Canadian mining firms were stripped of their claims. French intermediaries, who for years had quietly siphoned millions out of Burkinabe soil, were told to leave, immediately. Then Traoré reappeared, but this time, not in uniform. He wore traditional Burkinabe attire. No military gear. No visible show of power. Just a man standing before his people. The broadcast was quiet. No dramatic music. No production flair. Just the weight of his words. "We've been exploited for generations," he said. "Now that we've found our wealth, they want to take it back. But I'm not here to serve empires. I'm here to serve a people who've suffered too long." He paused. "Burkina Faso is not afraid. And I will not negotiate with thieves." Across the city, people erupted. From the markets to the universities to the countryside, the response was spontaneous. Fireworks, music, dancing, chants filled the air. "He said no. He said no." Old men wept. Youths painted murals. Soldiers in remote outposts radioed in messages of solidarity. Gold miners raised their pickaxes and held the line. And online, the movement surged again. Young Africans began posting short videos, holding up a clump of soil, a fuel bottle, or a gold coin, whispering the same phrase again and again. "We protect what's ours." Meanwhile, in Washington, the silence grew louder. For 12 straight hours, no press briefings. No response from the State Department. Just closed doors and long meetings. Oil lobbyists demanded retaliation. Intelligence operatives updated threat assessments. Aides whispered the same concern again and again. If Traoré's defiance goes unanswered, it will spread. And then, at exactly 7:42 a.m. Eastern Time, Trump broke the quiet. A single all-caps tweet. "Traoré just made the biggest mistake of his life. Africa will pay for this." Cable news descended into chaos. Markets wobbled. Analysts scrambled to decipher what it meant. Would the U.S. intervene militarily? Sanctions? Covert ops? But in Ouagadougou, Traoré didn't call a crisis meeting. He didn't issue a rebuttal. According to one aide, he glanced at the tweet and said, "Now they'll show us who they really are." Within hours, U.S. surveillance activity in West Africa tripled. Naval ships repositioned in the Gulf of Guinea. AFRIM, the U.S. Africa Command, issued a discreet warning of rising instability. Private intelligence firms launched cyber offensives, probing Burkina Faso's digital infrastructure for weaknesses. The military responded fast. Anti-air defenses were deployed. Special forces surrounded oil facilities. Gold convoy routes were hardened with armored escorts. Key infrastructure was brought under direct military control. No foreign signal traffic was allowed. No drones flew unchallenged. And Traoré wasn't left to face it alone. ES allies, Mali, Niger, Guinea, responded with military urgency. Mali sent armored units across the border. Niger activated radar systems to watch for foreign aircraft. Guinea shocked the region by announcing a joint rapid response pact. Any attack on Burkina Faso would be considered an attack on all AES members. What happened next was unprecedented. It wasn't just states rising to Traoré's defense, it was people. In Nigeria, South Africa, Senegal, Kenya, thousands marched outside U.S. embassies. They held placards reading, "Touch Traoré, touch all of us. Africa is not your minefield. Keep your democracy. We'll keep our dignity." From Soweto to Lagos, the message was unified. This was no longer about Burkina Faso. This was about Africa's right to decide its future, without permission, without interference. Still, the machine moved. Digital attacks escalated. Bots flooded social platforms with fake scandals and conspiracy theories about Traoré. Western media ran coordinated headlines: Burkina Faso faces collapse. Isolation looms under military rule. Traoré risks humanitarian crisis. Inside Africa, no one bought it. Instead, the youth clapped back by remixing those headlines into protest songs. They made memes. They made t-shirts. They turned the smear campaigns into fuel. The more the West attacked him, the more Traoré's legend grew. And then, in one final blow to the old script, Traoré released a short video just 43 seconds long. It wasn't flashy. No music. No drama. Just his face, steady and unshaken. This is not just about oil. This is not just about gold. This is about the soul of Africa. And I would rather die standing than live kneeling. In less than a day, the video was reposted 12 million times. Former African presidents, who had once stayed silent, broke ranks and praised Traoré as a new kind of leader. Not bought. Not handled. Not begging. A man with dirt on his boots and history in his hands. Even Time magazine couldn't ignore it. The man America can't bully. Inside Traoré's African uprising. But the danger hadn't passed. Behind closed doors, U.S. agencies redrew plans. Contractors lobbied for escalated measures. Sanctions were drafted. And still, Traoré stood firm. He had become more than a president. He was now a movement. A blueprint. A warning to those who thought Africa would never fight back. He wasn't supposed to resist. He wasn't supposed to survive. And he definitely wasn't supposed to go viral. But there he was, 35 years old, from the dust of Ouagadougou, staring down empires without blinking. And all he had to say was this: Burkina Faso is not afraid. And I will not negotiate with thieves. This isn't just a story about Burkina Faso. It's a wake-up call. A reminder that sovereignty isn't given. It's claimed. Traoré drew the line. Now it's up to us to stand with those who defend it. If you believe Africa's future should be decided in Africa, share this story. Talk about it. Stand up, because silence is complicity, and history is watching.